Welcome. Settle in. Allow your mind to drift away from the noise of today. The world around you slows. The lights dim behind your eyes, and time itself begins to dissolve. Let the worries of the present soften and fall away as we take a quiet step into the distant past beyond recorded memory, beyond written words to a time when the world was wild, cold, and unfamiliar. Tonight, we explore the lives of the Neanderthal humans of an ancient kind. Not quite us, but not entirely other. For over 300,000 years, they survived in the heart of the Ice Age world, a world of stone and wind, of fire and flint, of danger, endurance, and quiet ingenuity. But despite their often misunderstood reputation, Neanderthals were not mere grunting savages clinging to survival. They lived complex lives-fashioning tools, nurturing families, and adapting to one of the harshest climates Earth has ever known. Their story is not one of war or conquest, but of persistence, of shelter built into cliff faces, of bones buried with care, of survival shaped by silence, snow, and stone. So, allow yourself to be drawn into their world, not with a jolt, but a slow unraveling. Imagine walking into a cave thick with the smell of old earth and ash, lit only by the flicker of ancient firelight, and begin to see through the eyes of those who came long, long before. Imagine the sun rising over a rugged valley, its pale light brushing against cliffs and pine forests, the shadows of distant mammoths fading into the mist. This was the home of the Neanderthalvist, wild and demanding. Life here was measured not in hours or days, but in seasons, in migrations, in the slow carving of stone. A Neanderthal morning might begin with the soft crackle of a dying fire and the faint murmur of wind brushing past the cave mouth. The scent of smoke, mingled with the dampness of night, still clings to the furs draped across the sleeping forms of a small band. They stir, slowly, wrapped in thick pelts stitched from deer hides, their fingers stiff from the cold. Clothing was not an afterthought, it was essential. Layers of animal skins, wrapped and tied, sometimes softened with rendered fat or sewn with sinew, provided protection against the relentless chill. There were no buttons, no dyes, just the warmth of survival, drawn from what the world gave freely and with hardship. As light filters deeper into the Dwellinger cave, a rock overhang, sometimes a constructed windbreak of stones, and Bones the group begins its rituals of the day. Stones are inspected, flints are chosen. The process of tool-making begins, not as a frantic scramble, but as a practiced art. Neanderthals were precise. With hands hardened by use and shaped by millennia of need, they chipped away at stone cores, sending fine flakes flying, until a sharp edge emerged. These tool-shaned axes, scrapers, alls were used not just for hunting, but for every facet of life. Cutting meat, scraping hides, shaping wood. Some were carried for long distances, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. A well-made flint point might outlive its maker. Food was rarely guaranteed. It was earned through a constant, patient watchfulness. Neanderthals hunted large game bison, aurochs, reindeer, even the formidable woolly rhinoceros. But they also gathered what they could. Roots twisted from frozen soil, berries in fleeting summer, eggs from cliffside nests. The diet, though rich in protein, was shaped by the land's scarcity and its seasonal temper. On a hunting day, small groups would move through the brush with a quiet familiarity. Spears, sometimes fire-hardened, sometimes tipped with stone, were gripped with strong, steady hands. There was no grandeur in the hunt, only necessity. The animals were massive, often dangerous. A single misstep could mean injury or death, and so every movement was measured, deliberate, and shared in silence. Evenings were a return to warmth, if warmth could be found. A fire coaxed from friction or smouldering ember was tended with care, fed with dried wood or bone. Around it food was cooked, skins were softened, and stories, though we cannot hear them, were surely shared in some form. Grunts, gestures, rhythmic sounds. The language may be lost, but the need to connect was always present. Children learned by watching. They imitated the older members of the group, picking up flint chips, trying to balance stones, mimicking the gestures used to shape a spear or stretch a hide. There was no formal schooling, only the ever-present schooling of survival. As night fell, they gathered close. Furs pulled tight, fire low. The cave echoed with the sound of breathing, of dreams wrapped in cold and stone. Overhead, stars flickered like the embers below. There were no written records, no names passed down, but in the texture of bones, in the wear of tools, and in the soot that still stains the walls of their shelters, their story remains. In this way, life moved forward, day by day, season by season, harsh, quiet, enduring. Now, let us look closer not just at how the Neanderthals lived, but at who they were. Imagine sitting by a low-burning fire, its light flickering across the faces gathered around it. In that glow, the features of a Neanderthal come into view. Broad, strong, distinct. They were not tall by modern standards, averaging just under 5.5 feet, but their bodies were compact and immensely powerful. Thick ribs framed a barrel-shaped chest, shoulders broad, arms muscular, and legs sturdy, as though sculpted by the terrain they walked daily. This was not a body built for running long distances across open plains like early Homo sapiens. Rather, it was perfectly adapted for short, explosive strength, for moving through dense forests, for climbing rocky hillsides and bracing against biting winds. Their faces were unlike ours, yet not entirely unfamiliar. A prominent brow ridge shadowed deep-set eyes. The nose, large and forward-set, may have helped warm cold air before it reached the lungs. Their jaws were robust, the teeth worn from years of chewing tough meats, fibrous roots, and perhaps even from using their mouths as tools, gripping hides, softening materials, holding while hands were busy. Skin color, eye shape, hair texture, these details are harder to trace. But based on genetic evidence, some Neanderthals may have had lighter skin tones, perhaps even red hair in some populations. Adaptations to cold climates, to weaker sunlight, details that remind us that even in prehistory, humanity was never just one thing. Yet the body bore the toll of this demanding life. Many Neanderthal skeletons show signs of trauma-healed fractures in arms, ribs, skulls, evidence of injuries not unlike those seen in modern rodeo riders or contact sports. Some wounds suggest close encounters with large prey. Others hint at falls, accidents, or perhaps conflict, though conclusive proof of interpersonal violence is sparse. But what is telling, perhaps even more than the injuries themselves, is that so many had healed. Someone had tended to them, watched over them, provided care while they could not hunt, could not move. A fractured femur, healed unevenly, tells us this much. The injured individual lived long enough to recover. In a world as unforgiving as the Ice Age steppe, that suggests community. Their physical life was demanding, yes, but also resilient. It was a body made for labor and for survival, honed by the needs of the environment, shaped not by preference but by necessity. And though the skeletal remains are quiet, nor resting in limestone caverns or museum drawers, each one still carries the memory of life. The twist of a wrist worn by scraping hides, the chipped tooth of someone who lived past pain, the bowed bone of a child who grew in hunger but survived long enough to leave behind a trace. These were not monsters, not brutes, but people of a different kind, shaped by a different world, one of endurance, adaptation, and silent strength. As the firelight flickers low, imagine the faces around it once more. Not just what they looked like, but what they felt: aching backs, chapped skin, the weight of muscle born from a lifetime of use. And behind the eyes, thoughts. Not ours, perhaps, but thoughts all the same. As the morning mist lifts from a riverbank, you might find, scattered among the pebbles, the quiet legacy of Neanderthal craftsmanship. A flint scraper, smooth from use, a sharpened point, shaped by patient hands, the ghost of thought etched into stone. Tools were not merely conveniences for Neanderthals, they were lifelines. Without writing, without metal, without wheels or domesticated animals, these early humans carved their world with stone, wood, and bone. And in doing so, they revealed minds both practical and deeply adaptive. Their tool-making tradition, known to archaeologists as the Mousterian industry, stretched across vast lands and thousands of years. With each generation, knowledge was passed likely not with words, but through demonstration, repetition, and attentive observation. The act of knapping flint striking it, just so to create a usable edge required a practiced eye and a steady hand. What emerges from these efforts is a toolkit both simple and versatile. Side scrapers for preparing hides, awls for puncturing leather, points mounted on wooden shafts, some likely glued with resin and bound with sinew. Recent discoveries even suggest the use of birch tar as an adhesive evidence of a chemical process requiring controlled heat and planning. It's easy to think of these objects as primitive, and yet, when held in hand-weighted just right, edges sharp and purposeful, they speak of a deep understanding of material and form. They were made to last, to travel, to be remade and reshaped. Beyond tools for survival, there are hints of a more symbolic mind. In some caves, grooves carved into bedrock, patterns etched into stone, too regular to be accidents. Not language, perhaps, but expression. In other sites, objects seemingly collected without obvious use: fossil shells, animal bones, pieces of pigment. Were these decorations? Talismans? Mere curiosities? We cannot know. Even fire, the flickering heart of their shelters, was not always easy to conjure. Though Neanderthals likely did not invent fire-making techniques as early Homo sapiens eventually would, they seem to have preserved embers, transported fire between camps, and controlled it well. Fire gave them warmth, light, protection from predators, and the ability to cook food, making tough meats more digestible and safer. In the dark months of winter, with snow thick upon the ground and daylight fleeting, the glow of fire must have felt sacred. Around it, the tools of the day would be laid out, repairs made, edges resharpened, and always knowledge quietly passed along. The sophistication of these practices reminds us that intelligence wears many faces. The Neanderthals lived in a world where every resource counted, every moment required attention. Their tools were not just artifacts. They were extensions of the hand and the mind, shaped, not only by need, but by ingenuity. So as we look to the past and trace the grooves of ancient flint, let us also imagine the fingers that shaped it, the eyes that judged its edge, the mind that knew its purpose. Let your thoughts drift now to the places Neanderthals dwelled. Not cities, not even villages, but pockets of shelter tucked into a vast and often unforgiving landscape. Their homes were shaped by necessity, by terrain, and by the quiet desire for warmth, safety, and continuity. Most often, they chose natural protection: shallow caves, limestone overhangs, or rocky alcoves shielded from the elements. These dwellings were not grand or permanent in the way we think of homes today, but they were returned to season after season, generation after generation. Within their soot-darkened walls, the signs of life remain: hearths blackened by fire, bones gnawed and broken, stone tools scattered like quiet memories. The floor of a Neanderthal shelter was not empty, was a canvas of activity. Animal hides spread for sleeping, stone piles arranged to block wind, bones stacked for fuel or tools. Ash mixed with earth to create a softer ground underfoot. Over time, layers built up millennia of use recorded in inches of compacted soil. Some open-air sites suggest more complex structures, rings of stones that may have supported wooden frames, or windbreaks formed from mammoth bones and hides. These places were less protected, but strategically chosen near water, along game trails, on high ridges for visibility. In such places, small bands would camp, work, and wait, always alert to movement across the snow. The number of individuals per group likely remained small, perhaps a dozen or so, sometimes more, sometimes fewer. Enough to share labor and provide care, but not so many as to overburden the land's scarce resources. Though Neanderthals were nomadic in pattern, they were not rootless. Their movements followed familiar rhythms, summer hunting in upland valleys, wintering near caves with reliable shelter. Each return brought a sense of continuity, of stories retold without words, of tools refashioned where they had once been forged. In some sites, archaeologists have found faint traces of spatial organization: hearths at the center, working areas to the side, sleeping spaces arranged near the back, away from drafts. Perhaps not walls or rooms as we know them, but the beginnings of human spatial instincta, desire to shape one's world for comfort and use. In colder regions, they may have lined their shelters with layers of insulating hides, or built raised sleeping areas with vegetation and bone. Fires were placed with care to minimize smoke, yet warm the maximum space. The scent of singed fat, the crackle of burning bone thieves were the ambient sounds of life. But these homes were always provisional. A cold snap, a dwindling food source, a predator's pathony of these could trigger the next migration. And yet, the sense of belonging remained not to a structure, but to a place, a bend in the river, a cave with red ochre on its walls, a cliff that once sheltered ancestors. In this way, Neanderthal shelters were both temporary and timeless, not just protection from the cold, but containers of memory. Within them, generations slept, labored, healed, and dreamed wrapped in fur, firelight flickering on stone walls, the world outside frozen, vast, and waiting. In the hush of ancient evenings, when the sky hung low and heavy with stars, there must have been moments quiet and unrecorded, where the Neanderthals simply sat together, around the fire, shoulder to shoulder, a child leaning into the warmth of a parent's side, a hand reaching out to tend a wound or pass a piece of meat. These gestures, though never written, form the soft structure of something deeply human: family. The bonds that held Neanderthal groups together were likely forged by blood, proximity, and necessity. Small kin-based groups were the heart of their society. In these bands, each member played a role. The elderly, perhaps slower, might still teach or craft. Children learned by watching. Adults hunted, gathered, and prepared what they could. It was a rhythm of shared effort and mutual survival. Burial sites offer haunting glimpses into the emotional fabric of their lives. In Shanidar Cave, in modern-day Iraq, a Neanderthal skeleton was discovered carefully placed in the earth, surrounded by ancient pollen grains. Some scholars once speculated this might indicate a burial with flowers and offering, a farewell, a gesture of tenderness. Though debated today, the suggestion alone speaks volumes about how we wish to understand our ancient cousins, as capable of care, of grief, of memory. Another body found in the same cave belonged to a man who had lost the use of one arm, had partial blindness, and suffered from other physical impairments. Yet he lived into middle age. He was not left behind. Someone fed him, sheltered him, and ensured he remained part of the group. In a world without comfort, this is no small act. Neanderthal childhood, too, left its traces. The bones of infants and adolescents appear at multiple sites, often buried with care. And while high infant mortality was likely a reality, the presence of toys or trinket small animal bones, perhaps fashioned for play hints at moments of joy, even amid hardship. Their social lives were probably complex, though not in the way modern societies are. Without writing or formal institutions, communication happened through gesture, expression, and perhaps vocalization. Research into the structure of the Neanderthal hyoid bone, a small bone in the throat, linked to speech, suggests they may have had the physical capacity for language. Whether they had full linguistic structures or a simpler proto-language, we may never know. But communication was surely present, in some rich and textured form. And so the family unit, however loosely defined, was likely central. Not simply a matter of reproduction, but a web of support, of shared fire and shared food, of bodies huddled together against the cold, of injury met with care, of loss felt in silence. In those ancient nights, the world outside the cave was dark, wild, and indifferent, but within, among the heat of the fire and the quiet breathing of others, there was a circle of connection, perhaps not so unlike our own. Now, let us drift forward in time to a moment of convergence. Two kinds of human beings, both shaped by struggle and adaptation, walking the same paths, drawing from the same rivers, staring into the same sky. Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens meeting, perhaps for the first time, on a quiet slope or beside a stream. For thousands of years, these two human species coexisted in overlapping regions from the sun-drenched plains of the Middle East to the wooded hills of Europe. The nature of their interactions remains elusive, a story told not in words but in fragment stone tools mingled in shared layers, genetic traces left behind in bone. It was once assumed that Homo sapiens swiftly replaced the Neanderthals, pushing them aside with more advanced tools, complex language, and larger social networks. And yet, the evidence is more complicated and more intimate. We now know that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred. Modern humans of non-African descent carry traces of Neanderthal DNA, small percentages, scattered in the genome, lingering reminders of those ancient meetings. These were not always encounters of war. Sometimes they were encounters of closeness, of shared shelter, of mingled families. Still, the differences between them were real. Homo sapiens, lighter in build and more versatile in behavior, brought new strategy, symbolic art, specialized tools, long-distance trade. Their populations seemed to grow more quickly, move more widely. They carried stories, painted walls, strung shells into necklaces. To the Neanderthals, this new presence must have brought change. Some may have adopted new techniques. Others may have withdrawn deeper into familiar ranges. Still, others may have quietly blended into these newcomers, their lineage carried forward in children with mixed heritage. There is no single moment when the Neanderthals vanished. Instead, their presence fades gradually from the archaeological record. The youngest confirmed Neanderthal sites date to around 40,000 years ago, but this boundary is blurred, uncertain. Perhaps some survived in isolated pockets for longer. Perhaps, in a way, they never disappeared at all. Some theories suggest disease, introduced by modern humans, weakened their numbers. Others point to shifting climates, reduced game, or shrinking genetic diversity. But most agree it was not a single blow that ended them, but a slow unraveling, a population dwindling, season by season, until the last ember went cold. And yet, something of them remains. In the texture of our DNA, in the shape of certain skulls, in our immune systems, our skin, even our sleep pattern traces linger, a quiet inheritance from an ancient cousin. So imagine, for a moment, a shared meal between the two species. A mammoth haunch roasted over fire, stories passed in gestures, eyes watching carefully across the flame, curiosity, caution, connection. In that imagined flicker, the distance between us and them grows a little smaller. Even in silence, the human mind seeks meaning. And so we asked, did the Neanderthals wonder? Did they reflect, mourn, hope? Did they look at the stars above their shelters and ask what lay beyond? We cannot be certain, and yet the clues they left behind invite a quiet speculation. Take, for instance, the careful arrangement of bodies in graves. In several sites from France to Iraq Neanderthal, remains have been found in what appears to be purposeful burial, bodies placed in shallow pits, limbs arranged, sometimes with stone tools or animal bones nearby. These were not accidental deposits. They suggest ritual or at least respect. In one poignant case, a child was buried near La Ferracie in France, their body laid on its side, knees drawn up, a slab of limestone placed carefully over the head. Another child's burial nearby was similarly deliberate. These gestures may not prove belief in an afterlife, but they hint at a reverence for the dead and awareness that death is not merely absence, but passage. Then there are the pigments. Red ochre and iron-rich mineral was collected and used by Neanderthals, perhaps as body paint or to mark surfaces. In caves like those in Spain, hand stencils and abstract markings dated to over 60,000 years ago may be attributed to Neanderthals, predating the arrival of Homo sapiens in the region. Was this art? Or something else? Signal? A memory? A mark of presence? The answers lie beyond reach, but the impulse is recognizable, to leave something behind, to say, I was here. Shells with pierced holes have been found at some Neanderthal sites perhaps, strung as beads, worn as ornament. Such adornment implies more than survival. It suggests identity, expression, even beauty. A need not just to live, but to be seen. These gestures, scattered across time and landscape, paint a picture not of brute instinct but of interiority, a mind aware of itself, a mind that perhaps dreamed, feared and loved. Some researchers remain cautious. They argue that such behaviors might not mean what we want them to. That evidence is fragmentary, ambiguous. And it's true we must resist the urge to project ourselves too completely onto them. But still, the possibilities linger. Imagine a Neanderthal woman, sitting at the edge of a cliff at dusk, watching clouds gather over the distant hills. She holds a smooth stone in her hand she found weeks ago, and kept for reasons she cannot name. It fits her palm perfectly. She turns it over, as the wind tugs at her hair and the sky darkens. For a moment, she is still, and in that moment, there is thought. Not survival, not hunger, just presence. We will never know her thoughts, but the possibility that they existed, that she felt something we might recognize, bridges the long silence between then and now. As we near the close of our journey, the final chapters of the Neanderthal story unfold not with spectacle, but with stillness. Their end was not marked by a singular cataclysm, no flood, no fiery demise, but by gradual disappearance, like the last breath of a winter wind. For tens of thousands of years, they endured. Through glacial advances, shifting game patterns, and biting cold, they adapted again and again. But eventually, something changed. Their numbers fell, their camps grew silent, and slowly, they vanished from the landscapes they had known so well. Yet in truth, they never wholly disappeared. Today, their legacy persists in the double helix of modern genomes, in the shape of a nose, the sensitivity of skin to sunlight, or the immune response to infection. Pieces of Neanderthal biology walk quietly within millions of people across the world. What was once separation is now memory, stitched into our very cells. Their cultural memory also lingers in how we think about humanity's roots. Once dismissed as crude and brutish, the Neanderthal has, over time, been reimagined through the careful work of archaeologists and geneticists. Each discovery brings them closer to us, not further away. They were not failures. They were not evolutionary dead ends. They were survivors, innovators, caretakers. For hundreds of millennia, they weathered a world we can barely imagine. Even their extinction holds lessons. It reminds us that no species exists in isolation. Climate, competition, cooperation, and chances shaped their fate, just as they continue to shape ours. In this way, the Neanderthals become more than ancient bones or misunderstood ancestors. They become a mirror, reflecting not only where we came from, but what it means to persist, to adapt, to leave traces behind. So when we look into the firelight, when we feel the wind cut across a lonely hillside, when we turn a stone over in our palm and feel the smoothness of time upon it, we may, in some distant part of ourselves, remember them, not with fear, not with triumph, but with recognition. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and the world around you softens into shadow, let the story of the Neanderthals gently recede into the quiet corners of your mind. They walked a world colder, wilder, and more fragile than ours, and yet They left behind fire rings in caves, tools buried in ancient soil, and perhaps even the echo of thought painted on stone. Let your breath slow with theirs. Let your body rest, as theirs once did beneath the shelter of stone and hide. And let the long, deep memory of humanity cradle you in this moment of calm. The world of the Neanderthal fades into darkness once more. Sleep well.